Good evening and welcome to this edition of Planet Action this Tuesday, the 15th of November 2020. My name is Purity Museo. Now, since the 6th day of this month when Global Summit on Climate Change, that's COP27, officially began in Egypt, Planet Action has been doing an in-depth coverage of the conference. And as the deliberations continue until Friday this week, we continue to break down the discussions at Sharm el-Sheikh. And today we unpack the whole issue of the clean energy transition, decarbonization, and how countries can combat climate change while ensuring sustainable economic development. Our guest tonight is an expert on energy from the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. But just before we engage him, let's get a few facts about climate emergency. So what are some of the causes or the main cause of climate change? The main cause of climate change is human activity, and concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is directly linked to temperature rise. Methane, for instance, is responsible for more than 25% of the global warming's. 30% of the world's population is exposed to deadly heat waves. According to the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, 2019 was the second hottest year on record. So what do we need to do to limit global warming? One is to reduce emissions by at least 7.6% every year from this year to 2030, deep reductions in methane, while at the same time it will be necessary to help limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or even 2 degrees. According to IPCC, conservation, restoration, nature spaces both on land and in the water, investing in natural solutions, again, it's another thing we need to do. And at the same time, governments at this COP27 are expected to review and increase these pledges as a key objective this year, that's in 2021. So this year, 2022, I beg your pardon. Now, let's get the latest again from Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, where COP27 is ongoing, and climate justice activists at the summit are demanding for community renewable projects that work for the people. African leaders say they are committed to the perfect clean energy transition plan, but financing the developing countries will be very crucial. Suleiman Yeri spoke to some of the stakeholders from the African region, and this is what they had to say.
My name is Omar El Mawi, and today being the Energy Day, it's really about speaking, as a person who's coming from Africa, it's speaking about energy solutions that are providing and dealing with the energy situation for the African people. So we have more than 650 million Africans who don't have access to energy, while all the energy projects we are seeing that are coming to the continent are for exploitation, are for export, to be taken, resources to be taken from here into the global north. So our message here is really key, that we want real solutions around the energy situation to provide energy for our people. And those solutions, we know that fossil fuels are not them, because we've been exploiting and dealing with fossil fuels for the past 6 decades. Nigeria is an example, Mozambique and other countries who are currently exploiting their fossil fuels, and they still have a huge energy problem within their countries. So what we're saying is now embark on clean, renewable energy option that are people-driven, which means that we are actually providing solutions that is the energy is going to the people, which they can now put into ways to improve their lives and their ways of living. So that's really our message that we're trying to pass across today, and we are asking all people involved, especially including our government representatives from our African continent, to have this at the back of their mind when they're having all these other negotiations with the other countries, so that they don't make deals that are supporting and favoring fossil fuel companies and affecting everyone else.
So Africa needs to develop, but under whose terms? Who says that we must develop through fossil fuel extraction? Not Africans. We are being told that because we developed by extracting oil, you should also extract oil to develop. But have Africans sat together and made that decision? I believe no. Africa can find their own solutions. And two, can we be paid for the damages so far caused by extraction before we even sit down to say that we need to further extract? Who is benefiting in this? For me, it's not Africa. So if Africa is to develop, let Africa sit down, look for solutions that are African, and decide these are the solutions we are going to take.
Of course, it's hypocritical, and they are being irresponsible because their pollution is costing Africa livelihoods and lives. They need to be responsible enough and move away from fossil fuels. But this does not mean that Africa needs to go their way. Africa has an opportunity to be a leader and build their own economies without following the historical polluters' pathways. Because if we start competing with historical polluters, their systems are very well developed. We might not beat them, but we can beat them by going green. We can beat them by being renewable pioneers. So historical polluters need to move away because we share the climate space. They have made it difficult for Africa. They need to be responsible enough and move away fast so that Africa can be able to prosper, because climate impacts are really rolling back the gains that we made in Africa in terms of development. So they need to decarbonize. They need to move away from fossil fuels. Africa needs to capitalize on this and move very fast and be the leader, and show the world that a world can develop on clean pathway and not on polluting development model.
And future low-carbon energy systems must produce far more clean electricity, including for transport and industry. But shifting to a low-carbon energy system remains challenging. It requires balancing the complex interplay between energy, economy, and environment. Many countries are relying on or considering nuclear power as part of their clean energy mix. So how can we combat climate change while ensuring sustainable economic development? Joining us in this conversation is Dr. Francis Ocheng, and he is the head of energy and environmental technology at the JKUAT University. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
A conversation about, decarbonization, how we found ourselves here. That's going on in Egypt. But let's come back home. When you talk about it's now time to cut on emissions, reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, did we even get here as a continent? And I know developing countries or Africa is not the largest emitter, but again, do we need to worry about reducing some of these greenhouse gases?
Yes, we need to worry about that, and more so because the impacts about decarbonization or reduction of greenhouse gases has two views to it. There is where you have so much greenhouse gases, historical, that have kind of filled up the whole atmosphere, and you need to reduce on that. And then there's the second aspect to it, of which Africa is a victim or a client, if you want, whereby we are also producing our own greenhouse gases. And some of these greenhouse gases, while we might say they are not so significant, they actually have a huge impact. Things like carbon dioxide, things like methane. You talk about landfills in Dandora. You talk about the amount of vehicles that have over the years been plying our roads, especially second-hand vehicles.
Right.
And these are generating huge amounts of carbon, greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, and even nitrous oxides. And these are affecting our environment. So yes, it is important that we do something about this, that we take a more proactive action and not just depend on saying that they have emitted, so we have a right to emit. No, we also have to take a personal initiative in this.
Absolutely. And some of the stakeholders from the African continent, they said what you're saying, that we do not have to develop, quote unquote, because they used fossil fuel that we do not have to get there. So that is the conversation that is ongoing. But right now, when you talk about decarbonization or undoing what has already been done, that's reduction of these greenhouse gases. Do I ask who it will take or what it will take, but who needs to be involved in this? Is it a campaign?
I think the challenge that we have is that for a long time, the discussion about reducing carbon emissions or decarbonizing the environment or reducing greenhouse gases, for a long time it has been mainly a game or a discourse that has been undertaken by the government and some NGOs, civil society actors. But when you want to deal with this thing holistically, it has to be dealt with it holistically, and that means every single person must be involved. Absolutely. Just like the way we talked about COVID, the way everyone had to play a part, be your brother's keeper. Everyone has a role to play in the decarbonization agenda. And that includes from the policymakers to the standard body, to KRA, even to Atieno and Wanjiko at the grassroots. Institutions like churches have to come in. Educational institutions, TVETs, primary schools, secondary schools, everyone has to put his hand to that mantle.
And they know I know there's a way I can come in, but the problem is Wanjiko probably doesn't know how she can come in. So institutions of higher learning coming in, churches coming in, and everybody on board, but how do I come in? The common Mwananchi is asking that question.
Well, let's start maybe from the very basic point, and that is the question about the source and the need for having that source. So you are your grandmother in the village, or my father somewhere, my great-grandfather somewhere, and they need energy to cook.
Yes.
So they need energy to cook. So which is the most affordable energy and the most accessible energy they can use for that?
Charcoal, for instance.
They would probably use charcoal,
yes,
or they would use firewood. Now, if they were to switch from charcoal or firewood to a different, more benign fuel source, they would make a big change. If one person does it, there's a change. If a village does it, there's a bigger change. If a whole community does it, there's a significant change. If a whole country changes, that is phenomenal. So that is one thing. Secondly, you have cars that most guys are driving like second-hand cars, some are driving new cars, yeah? And most of these cars are using petrol or diesel. Imagine a change where you decide, I won't drive my car on diesel or petrol, I'll use a different kind of thing. Maybe I'll use a biodiesel kind of system, or I would probably go for an electric vehicle. Yes, that if one person does it, again, there's a small change. A community does it, there's a big change. A whole country does it, there's a phenomenal change. Yes. So you see, at the end of the day, when you break it down to simple decisions, behavioral changes, what can I do as an individual at home? Like, for example, we have been doing some research on biogas. Yes, biogas is essentially methane. Yes. And you get it from cows, cow waste, and also you get it from decomposing matter, like fruits and vegetables, or even you can get it from landfills, where you dump, we dump our municipal waste, like Dandora or something. Yeah, that is waste. It comes out as methane. Now, if you take this methane and you burn it, use it as a cooking fuel, you change the dynamics, you change the paradigm. Yes. Of climate change.
So what are the options available? If the change happens within a community, it's a bigger change. One person, it's a bigger change. For communities changing from the charcoal they use, the firewood they use, what are the other options that they can use? Because maybe they do not know. And number two, how cost effective are these alternatives?
Well, for example, let's take the case of charcoal and firewood.
Right.
Right now, there's a program being run by African Biodigester Program, and where they are giving out, they're not actually giving out, you're buying biogas digesters. Now, biogas digester would mean that you would probably be using waste from the market, or even going to your neighbor, getting one bucket or half a bucket of cow dung and coming and putting it into your digester. That would mean you'd switch from charcoal, you'd switch from firewood. The effect would be there would be less demand for forest being cut down, less demand for trees being burnt for charcoal and stuff. Let's take another example, like there is now this company selling ethanol, cocoa. It's called cocoa, yes, and cocoa basically can even be made from some of our sugar companies, and be commercialized and sold and make more money for the companies than they would actually get from selling sugar. Yes, and moving from that, from fuel wood and from charcoal to ethanol would make a significant change again.
Okay.
Yes, and lastly, if you look at the case of vehicles, because you see the main contributors of climate change are things like transport sector, electricity sector, and also land use change and agriculture. So some of these things like the cocoa, as in the ethanol, and also the biogas digesters, they will definitely affect the issues of land use and agriculture. Transport is another sector that is significantly a big contributor. Having a change where we are going from maybe lithium-ion batteries instead of lead-acid batteries and moving towards electric cars or blended fuels like biodiesel, where you have a bit of fossil fuel mixed with some level of ethanol, you would make a significant change again. Electricity, we have made significant progress, admitted, because most of our electricity production is actually renewable, yeah, which is significantly good.
Yeah.
And but we need to think about phasing out the IPPs, yeah. And phasing them out would significantly change even the costing, yeah. And these are the things that one would want to consider.
Yes, and the issue of financing, of course, was the biggest agenda for Africa as they headed to Egypt. But the loss and damage fund discussion has been moved to 2024 because there was no consensus on that. So for now, there's no money because we won't pay, we can't pay, we don't have the money to pay. That has been the message from the developed world. So what are some of the lessons that we can draw? Rwanda is doing great in addressing climate change. Probably as a country, what do we need to learn from that as we wait for money to come?
Well, I think the problem we need first to address is a mentality problem. We need a paradigm shift and stop thinking about depending, so to speak, on foreign countries to fuel or to move our climate change agenda.
Right.
That has to be totally stopped. For my part, I think with the little resources we can make a change. For example, one of the things we have is that, for example, ethanol by itself. When you produce ethanol and when you look at it, ethanol is viewed by KRA, for example, Kenya Revenue Authority, views ethanol as an alcoholic thing and two, a medical thing, yeah, as in sanitizers and all that. It is never viewed as a fuel.
Right.
So a change within KRA to be able to give technical ethanol a better deal instead of taxing it so much would mean there will be more fuel of that nature being sold, reducing the efforts on this other side. Secondly, the issue of the policy framework. The government has to agree that certain things now have to be just allowed to come in for the betterment of the future of the countries.
Like
things like lithium-ion batteries. Yeah, their storage matters, but then they would also translate into transportation, in electrical mobility. Things like solar panels, wind turbines. These are things that, although the government might be losing in the short term, in the long term, this would have a huge impact in changing the climate agenda. Then also things like research and innovation. This is a discussion that unfortunately many people don't understand. You cannot depend on foreign technology. We have to develop our own technology that can make an impact.
Right, and we have to wrap it up now. Time is not on our side, but thank you so much, Daktari, for being part of our conversation tonight. And green, clean energy is the conversation that we should be having moving forward if we are to address climate change. Thank you so much for watching Planet Action this night. We continue with this conversation tomorrow. My name is Purity Museo. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing, and God bless.